The skull was found first, not buried, not hidden carefully, just barely concealed beneath a thin layer of rotting leaves, as if whoever put it there never expected anyone to look closely enough to find it. When the Liberty County Sheriff's Office received the call on the morning of August 22, 1989, no one thought it would reopen a mystery that had haunted Texas for nearly 2 decades. But within hours, investigators would realize they weren't just standing over human remains. They were standing at the end of a story that began 18 years earlier, with a young married couple who vanished without a single scream, a single witness, or a single trace of blood. And what police would eventually find scattered across those woods would force them to confront a chilling truth. Richard and Elaine Langston hadn't disappeared. They had been erased. If you're watching this, stay with me, because the details of how they were erased and why only get darker from here. In the summer of 1971, East Texas was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change. Liberty County sat quietly between long stretches of highway, dense pine forests, and small towns where everyone recognized your car before they recognized your face. It was the kind of place where strangers stood out and routines were rarely broken. Richard Langston was 27 years old. He worked maintenance at a local paper mill in steady hours, modest pay, and a reputation for never missing a shift. He wasn't loud, he wasn't reckless. Friends described him as dependable to a fault. Elaine Langston was 25. She worked part-time at a florist just off Highway 59, saving money while taking night classes at a nearby community college. She had plans, big ones. She wanted to open her own shop one day, something small, something hers. They had been married just under 2 years. They didn't argue publicly, they didn't drink heavily, they didn't gamble, they didn't owe anyone money. Which is exactly why, when they vanished, no one could explain it. On Wednesday, July 14th, 1971, Richard and Elaine attended a small barbecue at a friend's property just outside Cleveland, Texas. Nothing unusual, about a dozen people, music playing softly from a radio, beer in glass bottles, sweating in the heat. Multiple witnesses would later confirm the same details. The Langstons left around 9:30 p.m. Elaine hugged her friend goodbye. Richard mentioned he had an early shift in the morning. They walked to their car together, a light-colored sedan parked along the edge of the driveway. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. They never made it home. When Elaine didn't show up for work the next morning, her manager assumed she was sick. When Richard didn't clock in by noon, his supervisor grew concerned, but not alarmed. It wasn't until that evening, when calls went unanswered and the house remained dark, that worry turned into fear. By the following morning, family members contacted the Liberty County Sheriff's Office. The initial response was restrained. In 1971, adults didn't automatically trigger urgent missing person investigations. Officers asked routine questions. Had they argued recently? Did they talk about leaving town? Did they have financial trouble? The answer to all of it was no. Their car was discovered later that afternoon in the parking lot of a small grocery store just outside town, less than 5 miles from their home. The doors were locked. The keys were inside. Elaine's purse sat on the passenger seat. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared disturbed. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no fingerprints that didn't belong. It was as if they had parked, stepped out, and vanished into thin air. Police canvassed the area. They questioned neighbors. They checked nearby hospitals. They walked the edges of the woods. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors began spreading. Some claimed Richard owed money. Others whispered that Elaine was having an affair. One anonymous tip suggested they had joined a religious commune, Every lead collapsed under scrutiny. By the end of the summer, search efforts slowed. By the end of the year, they stopped. The Langston file was boxed, labeled, and placed in storage. One of dozens of unsolved disappearances, quietly gathering dust. And for the next 18 years, nothing happened. No letters, no sightings, no remains. Until a hunter stepped off a marked trail in August of 1989 and noticed something pale beneath the leaves. At first, he thought it was an animal. Then he saw the teeth. Deputies arrived within the hour. They secured the area. More bones were located nearby, scattered, weathered, separated by time and animals. Among them were remnants of clothing, a man's belt buckle, a woman's shoe. What followed would quietly confirm what families had feared for nearly 2 decades. Richard and Elaine Langston had not run away. They had not started new lives. They had died violently, deliberately, and their bodies had been left to disappear with the forest. Here's where the story takes a turn, because when investigators reconstructed the scene, they realized something unsettling. The remains were not buried together. They had been moved. Carefully, purposefully, someone had come back. And that meant one thing. Whoever did this never believed they would be found. Before we go any further, if you're finding this story unsettling, let me know in the comments if you think this was a crime of opportunity or something planned long before that summer night in 1971. Because what police would uncover next would split investigators into opposing camps and leave this case officially unsolved to this day. The discovery of the remains should have brought clarity. Instead, it created chaos. Within days of the find, Liberty County investigators realized the scene didn't align with a simple murder followed by a shallow burial. The bones weren't arranged naturally. They weren't clustered. They weren't even fully contained within one area. They were scattered, not randomly, but deliberately. Some remains were found nearly 40 yards from the initial discovery site. Others appeared to have been placed under brush piles, as if hidden just enough to delay discovery, but not enough to guarantee it would never happen. That detail bothered investigators, because it meant someone had returned to the site after the deaths, and they hadn't returned in a hurry. Forensic examination suggested the bodies had been exposed for an extended period before being moved. Animal activity explained some displacement, but not all. Several bones showed no signs of gnawing, no weathering consistent with long-term exposure, as if they'd been protected for years before being relocated. In other words, the Langstons hadn't been killed and dumped there. They'd been kept somewhere else first, and that realization changed everything. In 1971, Liberty County had dozens of isolated properties, hunting cabins, abandoned shacks, unused barns tucked miles off dirt roads, places where screams wouldn't carry, places no one visited unless they already knew they were there. Investigators began re-examining every lead that had been dismissed decades earlier. They pulled old interview transcripts. They reviewed handwritten notes. They listened again to recordings that had once seemed insignificant. And slowly patterns began to emerge. One name appeared repeatedly in early interviews, not as a suspect, but as a witness. A man who lived less than a mile from where the Langstons' car had been found. A man who had reported hearing something unusual that night. Back in July of 1971, he told deputies he'd heard shouting somewhere near the highway shortly after 10 p.m. He assumed it was drunk teenagers or a couple arguing. He hadn't gone to check. No one followed up. By 1989, that man was dead, but his property wasn't. Investigators visited the land, now owned by his son, who claimed he knew nothing about the disappearance. The property included a collapsed shed and the remains of an old storm cellar. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They alerted almost immediately. But excavation revealed nothing conclusive. No bones, no blood, no personal items. Still, detectives believed they were getting closer. They began mapping the Langstons' final movements. The grocery store parking lot where the car was found sat along a route that cut through dense woods before reconnecting with the highway. Locals used it as a shortcut. Outsiders didn't know it existed. Someone familiar with the area could have stopped them. Someone who didn't raise suspicion. Someone who looked ordinary. Which brings us to the second theory, that Richard and Elaine were never attacked at the grocery store. They were intercepted after they left it. Police theorize the couple may have pulled over voluntarily, perhaps to help someone, or because they recognized them. There were no skid marks, no signs of forced entry, no struggle near the car. If they were threatened, it happened later, much later, possibly miles away, and possibly indoors. Another disturbing detail emerged during forensic analysis. Both sets of remains showed trauma, but not the same kind. Richard's injuries suggested blunt force trauma to the skull. Elaine's indicated strangulation. Two different methods, two different moments, which raised a chilling possibility. Elaine may have been alive after Richard died, and if that was true, her final hours were likely spent knowing exactly what had happened. That possibility haunted investigators, and it should haunt you too, because it suggests intent, it suggests control, it suggests someone who wasn't panicking, someone who took their time. As the investigation widened, police revisited a lead that had been quietly ignored in the 1970s. 3 weeks after the Langstons vanished, a local woman reported a disturbing encounter along the same stretch of road. She claimed a man had flagged her down late at night, claiming his car had broken down. When she stopped, he tried to get into her vehicle. She managed to drive away. At the time, police dismissed the incident as unrelated. In 1989, it didn't feel that way anymore. The description of the man was vague, but the tactic was familiar. Lure, isolate, control. Investigators searched records for similar complaints. They found 4, all within a 5-year span, all within the same rural corridor. None resulted in arrests. One man's name appeared in 2 reports. He lived nearby. He owned land. He had a history of violence, though none of it had resulted in prison time. When detectives visited him in 1989, he was cooperative, too cooperative. He answered questions calmly. He didn't ask why they were reopening the case. He didn't ask what evidence they had. He already knew. But there was a problem. No DNA, no witnesses, no confession, no physical evidence tying him directly to the Langstons. And after 18 years, memories faded. Alibis blurred. People died. The case stalled again. Before I go further, I want you to pause here and think about something. If someone can abduct 2 adults from a public place without leaving evidence, if they can keep them hidden for days, weeks, or longer, and if they can return years later to relocate the bodies, what does that tell you about how confident they felt? Let me know in the comments. Do you believe this was one person acting alone, or someone who had help? Because the next development suggests the answer may not be simple. In 1993, advances in forensic science allowed investigators to extract limited DNA from one of Elaine's teeth. The sample was degraded, incomplete, but it confirmed the remains were hers. The case was officially reclassified from missing persons to double homicide, and with that classification came pressure. Families demanded answers. media attention returned, and someone somewhere started paying attention. An anonymous letter arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside was a single sentence: "You found what we left behind. You won't find the rest." No one ever claimed responsibility. No follow-up letters arrived. And to this day, investigators don't know if it was a hoax or a confession. What they do know is this: Richard and Elaine Langston didn't disappear by accident. They were taken, they were held, and they were killed by someone who believed time would protect them. So far it has. And as we move deeper into this story, you'll see how close investigators came and how easily the truth slipped away. Stay with me. By the time investigators narrowed their focus to a single primary suspect, nearly half a lifetime had passed since Richard and Elaine Langston vanished. The man had aged, his hair had thinned, his posture had stiffened, his voice was slower, measured, the voice of someone who had learned when to speak and when to stay silent. In 1971, he had been in his early 30s, strong, mobile, familiar with the land. He worked seasonal jobs, odd repairs, hunting guides, fence work, the kind of man who always seemed to know back roads no one else used. Back then, people trusted him. That trust is what made him dangerous. When detectives re-interviewed him in the early 1990s, they didn't accuse him outright. They didn't threaten him. They let him talk, and he did. He spoke about the woods, about how quiet they used to be, about how things were different back then. He mentioned the Langstons without being prompted. That detail stood out. He claimed he barely knew them, yet he remembered what Elaine was wearing. He remembered the color of Richard's car. He remembered the night they disappeared. Said it was hot, real hot, even after dark. Investigators noted every word. Then came the slip. During a recorded interview, one detective casually mentioned the remains had been found near the creek. The suspect corrected him. It wasn't the creek, he said. It was closer to the tree line. That information had never been released. The room went quiet. The suspect froze, Chow. Just for a moment, Enon then laughed it off. "I hunt out there," he said. "Everyone knows that land." But not everyone knew exactly where the remains were located, and not everyone would need to correct that detail. Despite this, the case hit a familiar wall. Circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. The district attorney refused to file charges without something concrete: a confession, physical evidence, or a witness willing to testify. None existed. So investigators tried something else. They appealed to conscience. They brought up Elaine. They talked about her family. They described the pain of not knowing. The suspect listened. He nodded. Then he said something that ended the interview. "People disappear all the time," he said. "Doesn't mean someone made them disappear." After that, he lawyered up, and the door slammed shut. Years passed again. In 2001, the suspect died of natural causes. No confession, no deathbed admission, no justice. But the story doesn't end there. Because long after the man was buried, someone else came forward. A woman. She had been a teenager in 1971. She lived nearby, and she'd carried a secret for decades. She told investigators she remembered seeing Richard and Elaine that night. Not at the grocery store, but later along the rural road that cut through the woods. They were stopped, talking to a man she recognized. The same man investigators had suspected. She said she didn't come forward earlier because she'd been afraid. Afraid of retaliation, afraid of not being believed, afraid of what might happen if she spoke. By the time she told her story, the suspect was dead. Her testimony could no longer change anything legally. but it changed everything emotionally. It confirmed what many had long suspected. Richard and Elaine didn't vanish into the night. They encountered someone who saw them not as people, but as opportunities. Opportunities to control, opportunities to dominate, opportunities to disappear 2 lives and believe the earth would swallow the evidence. And for 18 years, it almost did. If you're still watching, I want you to consider this. How many stories like this never get answers? How many disappearances are filed away unresolved because time erodes evidence and silence protects the guilty? Let me know in the comments if you believe cold cases should never be closed, or if there's a point where the truth is simply lost forever, because the Langston case remains open, officially unsolved, but unofficially understood. Their names are etched into records now, their story told, their erasure reversed. And while the person responsible was never convicted, the truth survived longer than he did. Richard and Elaine Langston were not forgotten, and neither is what was done to them. By the time Liberty County investigators sat down to review the case one last time, there was very little left to chase, no suspect to arrest, no evidence to test, no questions that hadn't already been asked. What remained were fragments of bone, of memory, of a life interrupted and never returned. Richard and Elaine Langston were finally laid to rest together nearly 30 years after they disappeared. Their families attended a quiet service, one that felt less like a funeral and more like an overdue acknowledgement. There were no caskets to lower, no remains complete enough to feel final, just names on stone and a space where answers should have been. For the investigators who had worked the case in its final years, the outcome was deeply unsatisfying. They knew what had happened. They just couldn't prove it. The working theory, the one that made the most sense, was simple in its cruelty. Richard and Elaine were intercepted after leaving the grocery store, likely by someone they recognized or at least didn't fear. They pulled over voluntarily. No threats, no weapons visible. Just a conversation that turned into a trap. Richard was killed first. Whether it happened quickly or after resistance is something no one can say with certainty. But the injuries suggest sudden violence. A blow meant to incapacitate, followed by more to ensure he wouldn't get back up. Elaine was taken, held somewhere remote. For how long, investigators could only guess. Days, weeks, long enough for hope to fade. Her cause of death suggested something personal, close, deliberate. Not a panicked act, but a controlled one. Afterward, both bodies were concealed on private land, somewhere no one would stumble across them. Over time, as fear of discovery grew or circumstances changed, the remains were moved. Not far, just enough. Enough to buy time. Enough to let the forest do what it always does. Erase. And for 18 years, it worked. The man investigators believed was responsible died without facing charges. Some saw that as justice denied. Others saw it as inevitability, the natural end of someone who had outlived his secret. But the truth has a way of surfacing. Not all at once, not cleanly. Sometimes it comes up as a bone in the dirt. Sometimes as a sentence said too confidently. Sometimes as a memory someone carries until they can't carry it anymore. In this case, it was all three. Richard and Elaine Langston didn't leave behind a mystery because they wanted to. They left one because someone made sure they couldn't tell their story. So this is it. This is what remains. 2 lives interrupted on a summer night in 1971. A discovery made too late to deliver justice, and a reminder that disappearance does not mean absence. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Silence protects guilt. Time does not erase truth. It only delays it. And somewhere, in cases just like this one, answers are still waiting to be uncovered. If you believe cold cases like this deserve continued attention, even decades later, let me know in the comments. And if this story stayed with you longer than you expected, consider sharing it, because remembering is sometimes the only justice left. Thank you for watching, and good night.